Feel the chill of a Svaneti night as it creeps into your bones, a foreboding prelude to the horrors that await in this secluded province. Picture yourself surrounded by the towering mountains and whispering fields, where every shadow seems to pulse with a life of its own, beckoning you into a realm of darkness. As the sun sets and the village falls silent, a palpable sense of dread descends upon the landscape, setting the stage for a spine-tingling journey into the unknown. Prepare to embark on an unforgettable odyssey, where the boundaries between reality and nightmare blur, and the echoes of sinister laughter haunt every step. Welcome to Svaneti, where fear reigns supreme, and the knocking shadow waits patiently to claim its next victim. Welcome to Eerie Encounters and Hauntings. We are thrilled to have you join us for 2 new spine-tingling tales of the paranormal each week, stories that will make you shiver with fear and keep you on the edge of your seat. From haunted houses to possessed objects, we have the most bone-chilling tales of the supernatural. Get ready for a terrifying journey into the unknown with our bone-chilling episodes featuring blood-curdling stories that will send shivers down your spine. So hit that like button, share the horror with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. This story will make shiver and fright. This is entitled Darkness Descends in the Heart of Svaneti. This was shared by Rod from Indonesia. Let's get started. The small town that would soon become the setting for my scary story is in the middle of the quiet, faraway province of Svaneti. It is surrounded by rolling farmland and looming mountains. The air there seems to hold the secrets of a time long ago. Every leaf rustling and wind speaking seems to talk about a world other than our own. For generations, people have told scary stories about the knocking shadow, a ghost that lives in these places. Its roots are lost to time, but you can feel its presence in every dark corner and every quiet conversation in the town. According to them, there is a malicious being that preys on souls that aren't paying attention. Its spectral form moves through the night like a wraith, and its haunting knocks can be heard through the silence. In one bad year, my family set out on an adventurous trip to Svaneti to get away from the chaos of city life. Attracted by the promise of peace, we arrived with eager hearts, not realizing the horrors that lay beneath the surface of country charm. As we drove through the village's twisting roads, I couldn't get rid of the uneasy feeling that covered me like a shroud. The scenery was stunningly beautiful, but it seemed to hide secrets that were darker than the woods around it. At night, when the light was going out and long, scary shadows covered the land, the village's true evilness became clear. We were sitting at the dinner table, and the heavy silence that seemed to kill the sound of our laughing sounded hollow. I did what I always do as the family cooked, chopping and stirring to feel better. I was aware of the eerie silence that hung over us like a pall, though. As the sun went down, the sky turned blood red and dark purple, and together they made me feel more afraid. After the food was gone and the plates were washed, I went to the TV to feel better. The soft light cast long, creepy shadows across the empty room. I called my boyfriend because I needed the comfort of his voice to get rid of the feeling of dread that was starting to take over me. It was getting closer to midnight, though, and I started to feel uneasy. The familiar chatter of the TV didn't help me feel better as I said goodnight to my boyfriend. His words were like a faraway echo against the background of the night getting darker. In the middle of the night, I went to my room. The creaking floorboards and shifting shadows were always a warning of the old evils that lived just beyond the door. Soon after, the sound of frantic knocking broke the quiet, as if called by an unseen force. It sent a chill through my body. My sister's voice rang, "Alex. Alex. Alex, open this door." It rang through the empty halls with such a sense of urgency that it chilled me to the core. When I got out of bed, my heart was racing, and I stumbled as I made my way to the door. As I reached for the handle, though, a cold realization hit me like a wave. All the doors and windows were locked and would not let any light in. But the knocking kept happening, getting louder and more forceful as time went on. So desperate to find out what was going on, I flung open the door and saw an empty hallway lit by the moon's pale light. The air was thick with an otherworldly quiet that made me feel like I could not breathe. That was the start of my scary and uncertain trip into the heart of darkness. While I stood there shaking in the hallway, the night's heavy weight hit me like a suffocating blanket. Fear filled my heart, and its cold shivers spread slowly through every part of me. I took timid steps out into the hallway, and the floorboards squeaked as if they didn't want me to be there. The air was thick with the smell of death, a sickly sweet smell that came from the walls themselves. The constant knocking echoing through the empty hallways, the low moan of the wind whispering through the cracks in the walls, and the guttural growl that seemed to come from the very bottom of the earth all assaulted my senses. It looked like every shadow had its own life and was moving and turning in the flickering moonlight, like evil ghosts coming to get what was theirs. Their eyes were on me, but I couldn't see them. They were watching my every move with a hungriness that made my spine tingle. But it was the darkness itself that made me feel the most uneasy. It was like a stifling shroud, pressing down on me like a burden. It moved and pulsed with a bad energy, twisting and coiling around me like a snake ready to strike. As time went on, my feeling of dread got stronger, like it was going to swallow me whole. I knew at that moment that I wasn't alone and that something scary was waiting in the dark to catch me in its web of fear. The knocking stopped, and there was a crushing silence that seemed to echo through the empty halls. It was like they could feel my fear. I stood there in fear for a moment, my heart beating in my chest as I waited for the next attack, which I knew was coming. But it never showed up. Instead, the darkness seemed to fade away, like mist disappearing in the early morning sun. The night's heavy weight lifted like a veil to show the start of a new day. The air became still. Fearing for my safety, I went back to my room, my hands shaking as I thought about what had happened that night. It was like a bad dream that I was awake from. As the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, I knew I had made it through, but at what cost? In the quiet, faraway province of Svaneti, surrounded by rolling farmland and tall mountains, there is a darkness that is hard to understand. This darkness speaks of ancient evils and unspeakable horrors that are just beyond the edge of our reality, waiting to take their next victim. As the first rays of dawn came in through the curtains and gave the room a pale glow, I lay there shaking and tired, but I couldn't get rid of the uneasy feeling that stuck to me like a second skin. I kept thinking about what happened that night like it was a bad dream. Each terrifying detail stuck in my mind. I got out of bed, my body tired, and made my way to the window, desperate for the morning sun to warm me up. But as I looked out over the farmland, the beauty of it seemed tainted by the presence of something evil and dark. It was very quiet down below, the streets were empty and still. Now that it was daylight, I still couldn't get rid of the feeling that someone was watching me, like they were looking right into my soul from the darkness. I pulled away from the window with a shudder and went downstairs. Every step I took sounded like a death knell in the empty house. I tried to call my family, but there was no answer. The place was too quiet. I felt scared as I searched the house room by room, feeling like the walls were closing in on me like the jaws of an unknown animal. But my family wasn't to be found. Their disappearance was a chilling reminder of how terrible the night had been. As I dialed my sister's number, I held my phone tightly in my hand and prayed for some sign of life in the suffocating quiet. When she answered, though, her voice was sleepy and far away, and her words were mixed with confusion. "Didn't I text you that we were going home tomorrow?" she asked. Her words made my skin tingle. It hit me like a sledgehammer, and I could feel the blood leaving my face. What happened that night really happened. The cries and knocking that echoed through the empty halls and the fear that gripped me like a vice were all real. They were a scary glimpse into a world beyond our own. With shaky hands, I looked at the security footage from our CCTV system, trying to find a reason for the terrible things that had happened that night, but seeing the fuzzy pictures move around on the screen made my heart sink like a stone. There was no sign of attackers, and there were no shadowy figures moving in the dark. Our home was just empty hallways and quiet rooms. It felt like nothing that happened that night had ever happened. I felt like I was stuck in a bad dream from which I could not wake up. I fell to the floor, feeling depressed and powerless. The terrible things that happened that night left a scar on my body that would never fully heal. It was a warning of the darkness that was just beyond the edge of our world, waiting to take another life. It was cold outside, and I knew I would never be able to get away from the fear that had taken over me in the middle of the quiet, faraway province of Svaneti. The real scary thing wasn't the darkness itself, but the thought that it could reach out and touch us even when it was light outside. However, the fear that had taken over me wouldn't go away as the day went on. There was a dark cloud over my head that made me feel bad in every way. I tried to go about my normal day and act like everything was fine, but the memory of that night was always there, ready to take over again. As it got darker again, I felt like I had to go back to the empty hallway where the nightmare had started. Although it was a warm summer night, the air was thick with a strange chill that made my skin tingle. I took cautious steps deeper into the darkness, and the floor squeaked under my weight as if they didn't want me to be touched. It felt like the walls were closing in on me. They were slippery from my cold sweat, which seemed to have a life of its own. I reached out with a shaking hand, rubbing my fingers against the peeling wallpaper as I tried to find some sense of normalcy in the chaos. However, all I could hear was the sound of my own fear resonating through the empty halls like a scary tune. The knocking started again, with the same low, rhythmic thud that sounded like it came from the house's roots. My heart sank into my mouth, and every instinct told me to run away from whatever horror I couldn't see beyond the threshold. It was hard for me to move. Someone or something I couldn't see had me frozen in place and holding me captive. It felt like the walls were going to fall down around me as the knocking got louder and more forceful. And then, all of a sudden, the knocking stopped, leaving behind a sound that was so quiet it was almost startling. I strained my ears, looking for any sound of movement or any hint of what was outside my safe haven. But there was nothing there. There was nothing but darkness in front of me, which seemed to go on forever. I grabbed the nearest light switch with a hand that was shaking. My fingers fumbled in the dark until they found a grip. Soon, there was a flash of light that filled the hallway with a creepy glow that made the walls look like they were covered in long, twisted shadows. So there, in the dim light, I saw it, a figure just beyond the edge of the light, its shape so covered in darkness that it seemed to swallow the night itself. I wanted to scream and run away from the fear that was holding me tight. My voice got stuck in my throat because I was so scared that it felt like it would swallow me whole. The figure then moved so quickly that it made my heart race. As it came out of the darkness, its face was twisted into a grotesque parody of human features, and its eyes were glowing with a dark, scary light that sent chills down my spine. I wanted to run away from the horrible things that were just out of reach. I was frozen in place, though, unable to do anything about the fear that was threatening to swallow me up. With a sound like 1,000 lost souls wail, the figure reached out and grabbed my hand, curling its fingers into claws as it called me closer. That's when I knew I was lost and couldn't get out of the nightmare that had taken over my whole life. In the quiet, faraway province of Svaneti, surrounded by rolling farmland and tall mountains, there is a darkness that is hard to understand. This darkness speaks of ancient evils and unspeakable horrors that are just beyond the edge of our reality, waiting to take their next victim. And as the figure got closer, I knew I couldn't stop it because I could hear its laughter in the empty halls. The real scary thing wasn't the darkness itself, but the thought that it could reach out and touch us even when it was light outside. My heart was beating like a drumbeat of approaching doom as the figure got closer and its laughter echoed through the empty halls. Fear kept me from moving, so all I could do was watch as the scary presence moved toward me. Its shape was twisted into a grotesque appearance of humans, and its eyes were shining with a dark, evil light. It got colder and heavier with fear with each step. My mind begged to get away from the nightmare I was seeing, but my body stayed still, frozen by a force I couldn't see. After a sudden shock that made it impossible for me to breathe, the figure with its twisted face appeared in front of me. My body had a strong desire to run away, but the creature's hypnotic gaze held me captive, and I couldn't take my eyes off the deep, dark hole inside. At that horrifyingly clear moment, I knew I had no power at all against the evil force that had me in its grip. With one last, scary laugh, the figure reached out its hand, getting closer as its fingers curled into claws. Then, the darkness wrapped its suffocating arms around me, and my world was filled with an endless void of fear. My fate was sealed by the supernatural being that lived in the heart of Svaneti. If this video left you spellbound, dive deeper into the world of chilling tales by joining our channel, Eerie Encounters and Hauntings. Access a treasure trove of bone-chilling stories waiting for you with new episodes 2 times a week. Spread the fear among your friends and family who crave a good scare and give them goosebumps. We'd love to hear your spine-tingling experiences as well, so don't hesitate to share them in the comments. You can also send us your story so we can feature it in one of our future episodes. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Stay scared. Disclaimer: this video is for entertainment purposes only. The stories depicted in this video are shared by people who believe they are true, but they have not been verified. Any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental. The views and opinions expressed in this video are those of the people who shared the stories and do not necessarily reflect the views of YouTube, Google, or Facebook. The channel does not endorse the views expressed in this video. This video is not intended to be used as evidence of any supernatural or paranormal activity. If you are experiencing paranormal activity, please contact a qualified professional.